Let's see here. Hello, am I live? Hi, Brianna. Listen, I'm in once again like a third-party streaming or a separate streaming program. So if we're gonna see if my cyberpunk self can manage this today. Hi, Jen T, first-time caller, long-time listener. Hello. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Prime. How is everybody doing? Where is everybody tuning in from today? Hi, Gore Vidal. Hi, Laura. Oh my God. I have a lot going on the screen. I have a lot around me. Don't worry, I'll try not to use my gadgets too much. I won't be doing that nonstop, don't worry. Hi, Lukash. Hi, Kirsten from Boston. Patrick from South Texas. Hope you're doing well. Gore Vidal says, sorry about last week. What happened last week, Gore Vidal? We have Massachusetts. Snowed in this morning. I heard there's a huge winter storm with part of the states. And here in Seattle, it's like 80 degrees. It's incredible. In May. Unbelievable. It's super hot here. So don't judge me if I'm sweating. Another week and cyberpunk progresses. Yeah, I'm embracing it. It's been quite the journey from week 1. Now we're in week 8, as I've really kind of embraced my new lifestyle as non-binary part machine. Jax, JHAXX. New channel name is called Snow Crash, coming soon. One more page says hi from Austin, Texas. A lot of Texas people. Are you guys just all out back to normal in Texas? This is crazy. Richard reads, hi, how are you? Yeah, no wires or monitors yet. Still working on that. I do have a little wire coming out today out of my computer. Just one, though, for flavor. You can't see it, but it adds to the ambiance of the scene. Okay, so we have a lot to get through today. We're going to do the M reading. We're going to briefly go over the Pulitzer, and then we're going to talk about film, zoning in on the films that made me the reader I am today, okay? White Crow, how are you? Voice and Notes of a Scandal, here I am. That's a very random reference. Quite appropriate for today. Today's theme, yes. Notes on a Scandal is a great campy film. Yes. Hi, Elizabeth Tyranny. Welcome. Are any of you having your coffee along with me? Listen, we're week 8 into self-isolation, and it's dark. I was roaming QFC yesterday and looking for coffee to drink, and I came across this little thing. It's from an establishment called Dunkin' Donut, okay? Dunkin' Donut. Now, I've never been to one of these establishments, but I saw this on the shelf, and it says cold brew coffee, caramel black. Now, they had 2 types. They had regular black and caramel black, and the regular black had like double the calories and more sugar. And I don't understand this thing. If you're going to advertise that you're selling black coffee, it should not have milk in it, and it should not have sugar in it. You know, this is a criminal. Lukash says Dunkin' Donuts coffee tastes like dirt. Well, this is my attempt to kind of come down to the everyday man, try to connect with the masses through this Dunkin' Donut caramel black coffee, okay? I've never been in one of those establishments. Can anyone tell me what goes on in a Dunkin' Donut place? Richard Reed says I'm taking my hipster pictures in Dunkin' Donuts and using filters to make it look like somewhere else. We don't have a Dunkin' Donut within my locale. Hi, Grace. I'm going mainstream. Yeah, this is me in week 8 coming down to everybody and having a Dunkin' Donut moment. Okay. Let's see. So, I do like this little bottle. Okay. Stephanie gets ads on Hulu. Oh God, we're down with the masses on Hulu advertisers. Yeah, it's not, it's still sweet, but it's, not obscenely sweet. It's a caramel Dunkin' Donut moment on week 8 of self-isolation, nearing the end of the world. One more page says Dunkin' Donuts is a huge chain in New England, been around for decades, great eclairs and crullers. Okay. Yeah, we have some of them in Washington, but again, I've never been in that establishment. Brianna, you're back on that Maxwell House Folgers life. I don't judge you for that because it is something Americana about it. White Crow says I should be drinking whiskey. Well, I saw a coffee product that was even lower than a Dunkin' Donut moment, but I'm going to save that maybe for week 9 if there is one. Americana. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all staying safe. If you're in America, there's a good chance that you're back to normal. I don't know. Back to normal. Things are still self-isolation within Seattle, though you do get the sense that people are becoming more sloppy with it all. I notice, there's more cars out, there's more people out, especially like a day like today where it's 80 degrees. I feel people are getting restless, but, people overall have been very responsible here in the Seattle. Hi, Sue. Normal is highly overrated, for sure. Who wants to be normal? Am reading. Have you guys been reading? Going over, I finished 2 books this week, which is kind of the norm. I finished Mother's Milk by Edward St. Aubyn, which is the 4th book in his Patrick Melrose series. These books, I love them. This was interesting. These books read very fast, but for whatever reason, I've spaced them out to only reading one per year. So this is the 4th year in which I've been picking one of these up. And this one was quite different. The Patrick Melrose series follows this kind of asshole, rich, heroin addict guy named Patrick Melrose. And the first 3 books were written in the early to mid 90s and make up a trilogy that St. Aubyn wrote. And then he revisited the world, which is very autobiographical. He revisited the world of Patrick Melrose 10 years later in 2005, and he returned to it with Mother's Milk. And I think it's my least favorite out of the books so far. But it's also kind of one that I look forward to revisiting the most when I eventually return to the series, which I do love. Because on one hand, I think it lost some of the energy of the original trilogy, but this also takes place 10 years after the events of that trilogy and him recovering from being a heroin addict. And this finds him in the state of being a father. And as the title suggests, it more involves kind of dealing with his mother and his wife, who is a new mother to their newborn, and all that. So yeah, these are great books, though. If you want really funny, witty, biting books, these are fantastic. Hi, Bruno. Yeah, Bruno, you've been racing through. I was just saying, Bruno, how I've only been reading one of these out of the series per year. And I think I'll continue. There's only one more book called At Last. I think I will continue and wait until next year to finish up the series, even though they are very readable. I also finished, I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I had read The Immense Journey by Lauren Isley, science writer. He's an anthropologist, published books in the 50s and 60s primarily. And I've continued on with his collection within this bind up and read the Firmament of Time, which was incredible. I just love his writing, The Firmament of Time, focusing on really the time period where man went from totally, all of his beliefs revolved around the supernatural in regards to the Bible and of God, into the time of accepting the natural world. And, I think we think about science and religion, butting heads and being kind of on the polar, ends of the spectrum. And Isley really goes into that time frame where man was gradually starting to accept the natural world. And, for example, he talks about, there was a time where man could see or hear rain outside, and he would, without question, could envision the drowning of the world with Noah. However, there was no curiosity past that. There was no interest in why rain is and the effects it has on the land and the rivers and the sea. It was from God. And, he talks about that period where man started to become curious. And we have a vision of when man first get into science, we have this, thought that, one day a guy just came across a fossil or an ancient, bone, and, a light bulb went off. But it wasn't like that. It was a very gradual thing where even scientific exploration was done through the guise of religion. And, by looking into the natural world, we weren't trying to discredit the Bible. We were trying to find more of kind of God's wonder and more of his power within creation. And kind of just throughout how time has slipped away, it follows things into man's realization that extinction was a thing, that was a very hard thing for humanity to grasp, because, humanity had come to terms that, we will die, of course. And, we die because of our original sins in Eden and, working our way towards heaven. Man had accepted death. But man, when he suddenly was finding, woolly mammoth bones and realizing that there was entire species that had been wiped off the face of the earth, he could not justify how God would create something only to completely eradicate it. And it made man realize that he himself, could one day become extinct. So, yeah, it's really intriguing. And Isley, the thing is with this science writing is it's tough in twofold. One, if you have limited intelligence regarding the subject, which is certainly me, but also, this was published in the 1960s, so a lot of the science is out of date. So because of that, it can be troublesome, but you never feel totally lost within Isley, just because he's such a strong writer and he has such beautiful poetic prose that even if you're kind of not in it, you kind of are through his welcoming writing. Yeah, Sue says extinction is looking pretty damn real lately. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. White Crow says, how would you know it's out of date? For sure. I mean, a lot of the stuff, I wouldn't know what's out of date and what's not. But even stuff, an idiot like me, especially, he goes into a lot into evolution. And between 1960 and now, there's been a lot of course, new science related to evolution, which is not in here. So, yes. Don't worry, it's not going to turn into church grace. I'm a pagan. I'm a pagan, you guys. In the world of cyberpunk, the god is the machine. Okay, you guys? God is the machine. In terms of what I'm currently reading, I'm 100 pages into The Good Terrorist by Doris Lessing. Incredible, phenomenal. This is my first Doris Lessing, and she's one of those authors you're always like, oh, I'll get around to Doris Lessing one day. And this was just like blew my brains out. It's unbelievable. And I don't know, I didn't have any expectations going into Lessing. I knew nothing about her other than that she was raised in Africa, and I had no expectations. I think I was expecting maybe something a little bit more dry and contemplative, but this is so funny and witty, and it's the story about this woman named Alice who gets kind of pulled into this activist group who are all staying in this rundown squat in London, I think in London, somewhere in the UK. And she kind of comes in and becomes part of this commune of activists and communists. And the first 100 pages is her just like fixing up this house so they can all live. And she comes in and there's no electricity, there's no running water, they're shitting in buckets in one of the empty rooms, and it's just her kind of making the place habitable. And yeah, it's so funny. And Doris Lessing's writing is so good, and she just eases into that certain brand of 20th century female writers that I just connect with so deeply, like Muriel Spark and Iris Murdoch and Shirley Hazard and Christina Stead and all these women who were just writing these sharp, confident, interesting books, and this definitely slips right in. So 100 pages into that, it's so good. Doris Lessing, man. My first Doris Lessing. One more page says the fifth child is good too. Yeah, well, this definitely won't be my last, for sure. Sugar daddy's here. Dark times. Where should we go from here? The Pulitzer, you guys. The Pulitzer happened this past week. Are you guys into the Pulitzer? I made an Instagram post. I was talking about how, I do love to make fun of the book prizes, especially the UK ones. But I do always have a soft spot for the Pulitzer. And I think part of it is because there's not a huge ceremony. It's like, they have the announcements, they do the list of all the winners, they announce the winner and following the two runner-ups, and it's done. There's a simplicity to it all that I really respect. White Crow loves all book awards. Brianna says she doesn't watch awards, but the Pulitzer was kind of fire this year. Yeah, I heard people, I didn't know a lot of the other categories, but it seemed people were excited. But of course, being within this community that is focused on fiction, we're all kind of focused on that. And the winner was the Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which, funny enough, I had just mentioned last week when I was talking about the books I read last year and how I had a goal of reading 12 new releases, and the majority of which were disappointing, and how there was not one book, new release, that I read last year that was phenomenal. And, I'm not going to pretend that the Nickel Boys was in the okay category. I'm not going to pretend now that it won, that I think it's like some phenomenal novel, but it was a good book. It was in the okay / I enjoyed category. And yeah, I was happy. I was happy for Whitehead because, I wouldn't say that, the Nickel Boys or the Underground Railroad are like all-time favorites of mine. But I do think he's an exciting writer. I think he's taking true stories, some of which are very widely known, some of them, like the Nickel Boys, not so much, and he's creating these really interesting stories out of them. I still think he has a much better novel within him, but sure, double-time winner for Whitehead, why not? I thought it was good, and not to diminish his winning at all, but I think if you look at the list of possibilities from last year, it's like it was kind of glib, so why not give it to him? The Andrew Sean Greer, less, yeah. And funny enough, yeah, last year I had read The Overstory before it was announced that it had won, and I quite liked that. And I liked Less, which I think was the year before. I liked The Sympathizer a lot. I know the sequel to that's coming out. So yeah, I always do make it a point to read the Pulitzer winners, even if, I haven't yet. Yeah. Yeah, Andrew Sean Greer. I have a couple of his other books. I don't know if that book has stood up. Less, I really liked it when I first read it. It was a really enjoyable read, but I don't know if I'd recommend it now. But yeah, I mean, did you guys read The Nickel Boys? And if so, did you like it? Or will you read it now that it's won, you know? Yeah, Less, it was a big shock when Less won because it kind of came out of nowhere. I thought that was quite exciting. White Crow says his mom, or I'm sorry, his or her mom gave it to me because she loved it. Stephanie read it for the BookTube prize, so I'm not allowed to talk about it. Stephanie, just break the law. You gonna be thrown out if you talk about it, huh? Is that little guy gonna track you down? Patrick hasn't read it, but will definitely read it soon. Brianna hasn't read The Nickel Boys yet, but I've been wanting to read it for a hot minute now. Stephanie's a rule follower. Are you now? What's you guys doing that BookTube prize? Why don't they call it the best book that was published a year and a half ago? By the time you guys finish this, we'll be 3 years ahead of the curve. What's going on with that book prize? The BookTube prize, you guys. My goodness. Oh. This Dunkin' Donuts moment is not that horrible. It's actually very lightly sweetened. I still don't understand why the one that was called black coffee had more calories than the caramel one. That seems strange to me. Grace said the cover put her off less. Yeah, the cover was kind of goofy. But it was a fun book, yeah. Caitlin Ann, hi. I think The Nickel Boys can make a good reading day, but doesn't have much longevity. Yeah, I would agree. It felt like a book that was written relatively quickly. Did you get that feeling as well? I felt like he got it out pretty. He was trying to cash in on that, the success of the Underground Railroad, and was all about it. Yeah. Grace will probably read The Nickel Boys in 10 years. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's one you need to rush out and get. Unless you want to give your hot take. We love to give our hot takes here on the BookTube. People just furiously audiobooking it so they can get their opinion out. Andrea Dreyer says, it is harder to appreciate a book that for various reasons is only good for one read through. I think actually The Nickel Boys would hold up to, because there is a twist in The Nickel Boys that I think it'd be interesting to go back and watch, but yeah. White Crow Swoon is not one of the movies that shaped me, but thank you for the segue. Today we're going to be talking about film. And I put a call out a couple weeks ago of stuff that people wanted me to talk about on here, because God knows in week 8 we're running out of ideas, people. Okay, and a lot of people said film, and I was trying to think in what context I could talk about film, because I feel like if you just, well, I guess I am just going to sort of go down a list of films and directors that I love, but I'm trying to narrow it into kind of my beginnings. Because oftentimes with film, it just becomes of, have you guys watched, this movie? And then you're like, no, have you watched this movie? It's just like, it can be a little bit masturbatory. So I'm zoning it in on the books that help shaped my reading. And before I go into the list, I need to give some context to that because, one of the interesting things about having, yourself out there online as a reader, whether, you have a YouTube channel or a blog or whatever. Hi, Nicola. One of the interesting things about that is that it makes you reflect on your history as a reader. And it makes you think about, why do we read the books that we read? And I think, the average reader, I don't think thinks about those things. But I think, having this channel, it kind of forces you to do so. And my history of reading is very intimately connected with my history to film watching. Because I consider myself a relatively new reader in that I've only been a passionate reader since like 23 or 24 years old, and I'm deep into my 30s now. So like around 13 years, which I know for a lot of people might seem like a long time, but it's really, that's a very short lifespan as a reader, And when I say a passionate reader, I meant I went from reading maybe 10 books a year, which is probably being generous, to reading, we'll say, over 50. I've been keeping track of my reading for the past 8 years, and I think I mentioned last week I consistently read usually between 65 and 75 books a year. Okay, so I've been a passionate reader for 13 years, and I think my history of reading followed a similar path that I think a lot of people do, in that in my adolescence and into my middle grade years, I was a very voracious reader. And then once I hit my teens, I pretty much stopped, and I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's, you're hitting puberty and then you're going into high school and your interests are diverted. I think it probably also has a lot to do with curriculum and the way that books are forced upon kids within school that makes them, want to turn away from it as something that's seen as enjoyable. So for whatever reason, from about the age of 15 years old until the age of 23, I was not really reading at all. But within that time, I did, develop this huge love for cinema. And it, is what really ushered me into my reading years. So when I say that film influenced my reading, I'm not saying it has nothing to do with book to film adaptations or anything like that. I'm talking about, the types of genres and the types of writers and the types of books that I'm drawn to, I think, are in a large part because of that kind of love for cinema that blossomed within those years of non-reading. So does that make sense? Yeah. Brianna says she didn't really passionately start reading until a few years ago when I was 23. Oh my God, you're so young. Definitely more of a movie watcher, but I've never made the connection between the two. And as I go through, I've broken up into these films and directors. I've broken up into 7 categories, okay, you guys? So we'll see if I can do this. 7 categories of film. And again, this is going into those years where I was, first getting into film. So the majority of these films and directors that I'm going to be talking about today are very intro, film school 101 intro sort of popular directors and stuff. So there's a few surprises on here that I was very hip to, as a late teen and in my early 20s. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that during this time, and again, this was late 90s, early 2000s when this would have been going on when I first got into film, this was also the age of Netflix, okay, or when Netflix started. And that was a huge, huge deal because, of course, back then, and let me see, we have images today. Let's see if I can do this. Back then, they came in envelopes, okay? Do you guys remember this? I know some of you are probably too young to know what a Netflix envelope is. Isn't that horrifying? Okay. So, this was the age of Netflix. And Netflix, long before streaming, was a DVD rental service where, you would have a queue on the Netflix websites of film you wanted to watch, and they would send you, and you could sign up for different programs. So I think like our family, we had like 5 at a time. So you would get, these little red envelopes in the mail with all of these films. And their selection was just like phenomenal. Anything you could think of, they would have it. And they'd come in remember the texture of those little worn envelopes that they would come in? Oh, God, it's very nostalgic, you guys. So as a kid, again, late 90s, early 2000s, that really was my gateway in getting my hands on all this film. And it also corresponded, of course, with, the blossoming internet and all the message boards. And you could go on to LiveJournal and look at like film discussion groups and make your list of shit you wanted to watch. And you could pretend like you were a little film expert at home, right? Of course, nowadays with streaming, people have so much more possibilities. Valentina says, why don't you have Netflix anymore then? Well, now there's so many streaming services, and, I can buy whatever I want, I'm drinking my Dunkin' Donuts coffee, so I can afford my, my boutique Blu-ray lifestyle. Grace says they still have the envelope service but don't advertise it. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad, yeah. They still have the envelopes. I might do that just for nostalgia. Do you think like rental will make a comeback for nostalgia's sake? Yeah, Brianna says, I thought it was so cool watching all these weird indie movies, for sure. Yeah. Nicola says that there's more content but less range now with streaming. I agree too. There is things like Criterion Channel, but now there's so much that it can be harder to kind of pinpoint. Yeah. So we're going to go down. I'm going to try to be, relatively quick, but I broke this up into 7 categories, okay? The categories are going to be, I feel like this is a game show. The categories are going to be the classics, okay? And then we're going to go into Americana, then something called style over substance, okay? And then true horror, okay? And then a category which we're going to label the spectacle, okay? And then slow burns, and then finally camp, okay, at the end. And I'm going to mention like 3 directors or movies out of each category. And again, I could take any one of these categories and talk about 2 hours and dive into all the film, but I'm really trying to streamline and just try to give a taste. Again, the films and directors that guided me into the taste that I would then carry into my reading life down the line. Nicola says it's hard to find a particular classic or foreign film in one place. Yeah, it's super frustrating when you log in and you want to watch a certain film and it's like, oh, I need to get a trial to some obscure little streaming service, and it's just like, I just want it all in one place, which was why Netflix, the subscription service, was so great, Okay. Category 1, the classics, okay? Now this is hard, the classics, classic film. It was hard to just pick 3 out of this, but I did want to start and some of this goes even further back than my teenage years. I have to start with Chaplin. Okay, let's see if I can get my images up. Charlie Chaplin, I was introduced to him at a young age. One of the ultimate comfort watches. He's someone I still, if I'm having a gray day, I'll pop in a Charlie Chaplin film. My favorite, is The Gold Rush and The Kid are my 2 favorite Chaplins. I watch The Gold Rush for whatever reason. I watch it every Thanksgiving. Okay. I love those. And funny enough, I actually didn't really get into silent film in the silent era until much later in life, and into my late 20s and into my 30s. I really didn't appreciate silent film, with the exception of Chaplin. I've always loved him. The Great Dictator, Modern Times, Gold Rush and the Kid, The Circus. I love all his films. When we're talking about classics, a big word is comfort, and I'll relate that at the end of this. So Chaplin is a big one. Buster Keaton was a big one too, Brianna, but again, that was later in my life that I really started to appreciate a lot of that. And there's still a lot of the silent era that I'm not in tune with. Next, I want to go the films of Billy Wilder. I'm gonna rush. It was hard to pick just 3 directors to choose for these classics, but Sunset Boulevard, Sabrina. I love Sabrina, man. I've seen that movie so many times. It's so good. Some Like It Hot. Again, another classic. I love that. Sunset Boulevard, was so ahead of its time, and that's another classic that I really love. And then I have to mention, of course, Hitchcock. Our guy Hitchcock. Is my pictures working, Stephanie? This is really hard to make it pop up, but hopefully it's working. Hitchcock. Again, this goes back further than those teen years of kind of discovery. I have such a perfect, and I'm someone with a really bad memory, so the fact that I can perfectly envision this. I remember my first time seeing Rear Window as a child, very young, probably 10 or 11, and I saw it on Turner Classic Movies, and just being totally enamored with a film that I very much knew was before my time by the way that people talked and the way that people dressed. I could tell as a child that it was film, but yet the colors were so vivid. This Technicolor world and this set of Rear Window, which very much looked like a set, but yet was this marvel of construction. I remember just being totally enamored as a child, and it felt fresher to me than the stuff that was being delivered with what at that time would have been the late 80s and early 90s. It was just one of those moments, man. It was one of those moments. I love Hitchcock. Rear Window is my favorite, but man, all of his stuff. We talked about Rebecca a few weeks ago. I love Notorious. My favorite, I love Rope, man. Rope. Dial M for Murder. Nobody talks about Dial M for Murder. I love that film. Of course, Vertigo. I love Marnie. It's like Chaplin, I can put one of his films on any time. If there's ever a time where you just want to watch a movie and you don't know what to choose, there's never a wrong time for Chaplin. There's never a wrong time for me to put on a Hitchcock film. White Crow says Strangers on a Train is awesome. Have you seen it? Yeah. I love Strangers on a Train. Rope is just okay. No, Rope is the best. I love that. Yeah, Patrick Stewart as a gay man. He does it horribly, but it's hilarious. Weiler, yeah, Roman Holiday. It was really hard, and relating it to reading, it's a difficult thing to do because, when we talk about classic film, of course, we're talking about a medium that's been, around for 140 years compared to literature, which, has been around a little bit longer, going back to ancient times. So, when we talk about classic literature, which I do read a fair amount, it's different. Usually in modern days, when we talk about classic literature, we're talking about 18th and 19th century, usually British lit, your Jane Austens, your Dickens, your Brontes. Usually today, when people say, I read the classics, that's what they mean, and not the true classics of the ancients and Greek myths and whatnot. But I think there is parallels between my attraction to classics and classic film in that there often is, in both scenarios, more of a focus on story. You know, these directors and these writers were more focused on just putting forth a good story, you know? and not to say that there couldn't be layers within that story and different things going on, but they were more in tune with pleasing their audience and just putting forward a good story. And I think as we go on through this list and through time, you know, there is certainly directors and in turn authors that are more intent on putting forth a higher idea or fueling their own ego, and you know, sometimes the story gets lost in that. So when I think of both classic film and classic literature, I think of a focus on story, and that goes, you know, whether I'm picking up a Thomas Hardy book or reading a Chekhov short story, or going back further to the Greek myths, or you know, reading the Decameron by Boccaccio. It's just solid, good storytelling, and that's enough. So yeah, that's the again, we could spend like 3 hours talking about classic film, and within these other categories, there's certainly a lot of other stuff that would be you know, considered classic. But yeah, that's it. Are my images working? I'm very proud. Moving on to the next category, which is Americana. Of course, I don't need to link this or tell you why I link this to my reading. I'm a very patriotic person, okay? And the word patriotism, of course, in today's age is a very dangerous thing, because now it's been bastardized within our country and used in the name of racism and of stupidity, okay? But I do love American filmmakers. I love American writers. And again, I just wanted to highlight 3 of my favorites that were an influence back then, again, in my late teens and early 20s. Andrea says my images are working. Thanks, Andrea. I'm really proud of this. Let me know if I need more sounds too. Next category, Americana, okay? Film. So, well, that's the thing, Gorvidal. Patriotism and nationalism have, you know, are 2 different things, but they blended into one in today's culture, and it's terrifying. But number 1, most influential and probably maybe my favorite American filmmaker of all time is Robert Altman. Okay. I have such a deep love for Robert Altman. I try not to connect people, either the good or the bad, in terms of the artist and the art. You know, I try to disconnect with things, but I just, you know, I feel my energy, I'm tethered to Robert Altman in some way, and I don't know why. I wish he could have been my father, you know. I love Robert Altman. And so many of his films, of course, up here we have what might be, you know, each day is a new favorite in terms of Altman, but I love Nashville. I love his film, The 3 Women, with, God, why can't I think? Shelley Duvall. I'm obsessed with Shelley Duvall. She's another spirit animal. Brianna, I'm tethered to Robert Altman and Shelley Duvall, okay? But yeah, I love him. MASH, you guys, I just rewatched MASH like a month ago, and it's so good. Funny enough, I've never seen one episode of the television show, and I don't need to, because the film is perfect. I love MASH. Nashville and 3 Women. One of his last films, Gosford Park. I love his adaptation of The Long Goodbye. The Player. I like The Player, though I am untethered from Tim Robbins. I do not like Tim Robbins. I don't like him as a person. I don't think he's a good actor. He is not my spirit animal. I do not connect with him at all. He's also in Shortcuts. Yeah. which I love. Of course, Shortcuts adapted from Raymond Carver. But yeah, you know, all of his films, which are all so different from one another, but again, he had this signature style, and it's, you know, one of those first directors that I watched that, you know, you can piece together and see his directing with each individual film, even though they're all so drastically different. And that's another thing I carried with me into, you know, my reading is really becoming devoted to authors and, you know, reading many books written by one author to have that ongoing conversation between all the books, you know? And that's something I definitely got early on from the films of Robert Altman. Robotnik watched Bill Durham the other week, and Tim Robbins is so poorly cast. Yeah, he seems like a very nasty person. I don't know why. I don't like him. Brianna loves MASH, the show. He's yet to see the movie. I should probably watch the film one day. One more page says thoughts on Images or A Wedding. I haven't seen A Wedding, actually, but I love Images. Totally one of his obscure, weird films. Super moody. I have that somewhere. But yeah, loved Images. Second, in our Americana, I did want to mention the Coen brothers, of course, very influential as a kid. I love early Coen brothers. I love Blood Simple and Raising Arizona. My favorite Coen brothers film is the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, though. I love that film. I love the music. I love the color grading of that film. And talk about like directors that know how to cast their films. They always just have the most brilliant casting within their films. And of course, yeah, as a young, you know, cinephile in the making, I was super into them. Yeah. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is so good. Yeah. Blood Simple is great. Miller's Crossing. I was never that big a fan of The Big Lebowski, but, you know, I also haven't watched it in probably 10 years, so I probably should revisit it. But yeah, of course, No Country for Old Men. Yeah, definitely, you know, classics in terms of American filmmaker. And yes, the soundtrack for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is incredible. And then finally, for under the category of Americana, the authors who kind of shaped my childhood, and one that continues to do so today is Paul Thomas Anderson. You know, late 90s kid. Are you kidding me? Punch Drunk Love. Going into There Will Be Blood. I actually am not. Everyone considers this like his center masterpiece. I would disagree, but I still do really love it. The Master. Of course, this is going outside of my childhood, but Phantom Thread is maybe my favorite film of the 21st century so far. But in the end, it was Magnolia. It was Magnolia, just one of those definitive moments as a kid. And you know, through this video, we're talking a lot about older movies, but again, I was watching all these films in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was the golden age of the American indie, man. You had Magnolia, you had movies like American Beauty and Ghost World and Eternal Sunshine, Being John Malkovich, all this stuff, man. And you know, Magnolia was it for me. The ensemble cast, the soundtrack, it made me like an Amy Mann fan for life. Brianna, it was just such a great era of filmmaking. And yeah, I love Magnolia. Funny enough, it's I own like all of his films. I don't have a copy of Magnolia, which is funny, but it was a definitive film in my life. And again, you know, crossing over to my reading life, these authors and these directors focusing in on American identity, and maybe Anderson is not the strongest example of that, but, you know, my John Cheever, my Raymond Carver, Flannery O'Connor, Frank O'Hara, Faulkner, all these guys. I love all my American writers, so it definitely, both in film and books, has been my patriotic focus, yes. Andrea says it was a time where indie became mainstream and therefore lost its charm. Oh, you mean now? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we'll get into the ultimate indie one in a little bit. Robotnik says, a film lecturer asked a class if they'd seen Magnolia over the holidays. Some said yes. He asked what he thought. He said, I thought, oh God, Mark is going to make us write about this. Yeah, for sure. But it's so good, man. Tom Cruise in that. Come on. Americana, you guys. The second category. Going into the next. My images and sound effects. See how cyberpunk I have? I could never have done this 8 weeks ago at the beginning. And I've just blossomed into this hacker. I'm hacking the system right now, you guys. I'm hacking the system. Okay. Let's see. Tom Cruise did deserve an Oscar, yeah. Oh. Next topic. So next category is going to be style over substance, which is an unfair title. I should say this is style with a side of substance, okay? Because I don't want to pretend that these movies don't have substance. But these next handful of directors and films are, I think, ones that put their style before the meat, okay? Where my enjoyment of them, whether they want it to be or not, is more so of the style aesthetics of them, more so than probably the story or the feelings that I get leaving them, okay? And you'll see as we go through this. And a big part of that, and a huge influence on my young self as a cinephile and all the way through till now, is of course the French New Wave, okay? And, so many titles here. Let me get my thing. Elevator and the Gallows. We have Hiroshima Mon Amour. I love Jean-Pierre Melville. For those who don't know, the French New Wave was a movement in the late 50s and early 60s of mostly young French directors who were up and coming, who were revolting against the traditions of classic Hollywood and their way of filmmaking to present these more experimental films, and this movement and language, creating a new language within that of film. So directors like Melville, and Louis Malle, and all of these guys, but kind of at the heart, when we're talking about the French New Wave, there's always the debate between two directors within it, one being Francois Truffaut and the other being Godard, okay? The battle, Godard versus Truffaut. Here we have the classic, The 400 Blows, Jules and Jim, which I'm actually not a huge fan of Jules and Jim. Those two were kind of the heart of the French New Wave, and I've always been Team Godard, okay? Team Godard. I like Truffaut, but I think his body of work is very spotty. Certainly Godard is to some extent as well. But let's see. There we go. Godard, he's another person I directly relate to, because he's kind of an asshole. I think he had a great contempt for being within the industry, much like myself within the bookish community. And he was definitely, as Brianna said, he was much more edgy compared to Truffaut, which had much more heart. And Godard, I think, was more about creating kind of visual essays with his films rather than, cohesive kind of stories, right? We're talking, again, connecting it to the classics with the ego. But man, I have so much Breathless, of course. Breathless is the ultimate like douche movie where guys set their girlfriends down and they'd be like, baby, I'm gonna show you something incredible, and they put on Breathless, and it's a whole thing. But it is, even to this day, man, I watch it, and it's revolutionary in its simplicity. Band of Outsiders, Vivre sa vie, My Life to Live, I love that. This is late Godard, Every Man for Himself. La Chanoise, when he was getting more political, much more experimental. This is his films he did with Gorin. Again, much more political. Alphaville, my aesthetic. Oh, God, that kind of vintage yet futuristic vibe. My aesthetic. The Weekend, La Petite Soldat, all of these things. So, yeah, and very influential to me in my outlook. These movies, even the ones that are bad, there's a cool factor that comes with watching Godard. He was effortlessly cool in the way he presented things, and even if the movie wasn't that great, you still left it feeling like very French and very cool. and in a lot of cases, it was style over substance. Okay, and I can admit to that. Even though he was saying a lot of things, and through these visual essays he went to a lot of interesting places, it's the style, man. It's the style. So Godard still to this day is like hugely influential to me. And yeah, yes, you could watch Godard with sunglasses on and you just feel cool. You just feel good. Cathal says the Nouvelle Vague is interesting because they were critics too, for sure. Very engaged with cinema as a form and not seeing criticism as film as a separate film. And Godard was famous for that, of course. He was a huge asshole, making fun of all of his fellow filmmakers. He hated everybody, like me. Oh yeah, the connection between American noir and the French New Wave, going into Japanese New Wave. All of that stuff. It's just that, lightning moment in cinematic history, man. Nicola has barely seen any French New Wave films, but thought Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451 sucked. Yeah, I mean, Truffaut's just kind of all over the place. I love the 400 Blows. I like his Antoine Donnell series, but yeah. And then moving on, of course, anybody during this time, again, late 90s, early 2000s, and this is 100% style over substance. We're going to talk about Wes Anderson. Okay, my favorite of his being The Life Aquatic. I do like Wes Anderson, but I always leave his films feeling very cold. He is 100% all about the style in his little twee dollhouse world that he's presenting. And I don't think his screenplays are that innovative or interesting. I think his films ride or die on the visuals and what is a very visionary world that he creates. But you do get fatigued from it. Conrad T says the Grand Budapest Hotel. I did think that was maybe his most interesting, though I still think The Life Aquatic is my favorite just because I think his aesthetic matched so well with the whole nautical theme. So yeah, I do think he's style over substance, but I still, the style is really addictive, and it is very fun. The Royal Tenenbaums. I do love Bottle Rocket, his early film. Rushmore. I do like his films, but again, I always leave them feeling kind of cold. I also, he's another one that has these huge ensemble casts, and I feel sometimes like secondhand embarrassment because I feel like some of his casting are actors who try to Wes Andersonize themselves, and it comes off as really try hard. I think certain people adapt to it really well, like Bill Murray's obviously really great. But a lot of the actors, it's just like, ugh, it's just too cloying, and it's annoying. So yeah, I am looking forward to his, whenever he does drop a new film, though, it's still an event. I don't like those little animated ones. That Fox one isn't my thing, but it's still an event when Wes Anderson, even today, drops a thing. Yeah, Nicola Tenenbaums is a good example where Gwyneth Paltrow and Stiller and all them were trying to act like a Wes Anderson character, and it just comes off as really try hard. So style over substance, yeah, but still think. Alan's not a big fan of otters. Was it otters? Okay. Finally, in the category of style over substance, again, another director I love. I'm not as passionate about him as a lot of people, but David Lynch. Funny enough, back then, it was pretty much two of his films that were kind of influential to me. The first being his first ever film. Let me get rid of this. Eraserhead. And then what was at that time his most latest film, which is Mulholland Drive. I think I have them here. Yeah. Funny enough, I didn't get to his other stuff. I didn't watch Twin Peaks or Blue Velvet or any of the stuff in between really until later, kind of into my 20s and 30s. But back then, I was really into Eraserhead and I was really into Mulholland Drive. And yeah, Mulholland Drive is just, the Lynch film. I think it's the greatest film ever made about Los Angeles, and that's, a city that's had a million movies made about it, but I don't think any has tapped into what Los Angeles is to me than Mulholland Drive. I love that film. Yeah. Brianna, Mulholland Drive Give You Life. Blue Velvet is pretty good. Dune, totally pretentious, is insane. I actually respect a lot of aspects of Dune. But yeah, I think, again, the substance of David Lynch, I think, is not as deep as people want to make it out to be. I know, there's millions of message boards and stuff and people picking this all apart. I don't think he's necessarily worth that much thought that people give him, but he does create an aesthetic and this kind of nightmarish vision that is very much his own and very much, a style and a mood, okay? I've actually never seen Elephant Man, Conrad. So yeah, do you guys agree that he is his style over substance? I did love, and like I said, I didn't get into Twin Peaks until I think my early 30s is when I finally watched it. I didn't love the television show that much, but I did love Fire Walk with Me, and of course the Twin Peaks Returns or whatever was phenomenal. It was great. Cathal says he's pretty sure Lynch just makes it up as he goes along. His stuff is great, though. I love Twin Peaks a lot. Yeah, I get that sense, too. I don't think, his vision is worth, it's kind of like Danielowski's House of Leaves. I can respect it, and it's fun to kind of go through, but I'm not going to spend hours picking that goddamn book apart, okay? Connecting the style over substance to reading, certainly there are, authors that I read more for the style over the story. So I can definitely relate it to that. The first thing that came to mind was genre fiction with stuff like Raymond Chandler or John le Carré with his spy novels. Raymond Chandler, I don't pick up a Raymond Chandler book because of the mysteries that happen within, these detective stories. I pick up a Raymond Chandler book because of the style, because of the cool factor, because of this kind of bleak vision of, noir Los Angeles and Philip Marlowe, who's just effortlessly cool. That's why I pick up a Chandler novel. Not because I care about, the murder mystery that's happening in the background. Same can be said for like John le Carré. I have no real interest in spy novels, but le Carré has a very specific mood that he infuses within it, and a very specific style. And if you took that same story and had a less competent and less stylish writer write it, I probably wouldn't be attracted to it. So certainly, style over substance is not always like a bad thing, right? Andrea says, have you ever seen Psych? No. I haven't seen Psych. I don't even know what that is. Okay. Moving on. Ding, ding. Next category we're going to call true horror, okay? Which I've never been like a conventional horror lover. I've never been into like slasher flicks, all the 80s stuff. I mean, of course, as a child of the 90s, I was into Scream. And even up through today, this kind of age of intellectual horror with Heredity and the Get Out and that sort of stuff. It's not really my thing. But I did, there was like a series of like Giallo, which was Italian horror, that I was really into and influenced by in my, again, late teens and early 20s. Mario Bava, I love all of his films, Black Sabbath, Black Sunday, Blood and Black Lace. Of course, the OG, or not the OG, but Suspiria. I know you guys were trying to make that remake happen, but nothing will ever beat the original Suspiria. So the Italian horror, which was more kind of, had a camp factor, and it was more kind of this stylized version of horror films, with, the bad dubs and everything. I did like that. I also liked, or do like David Cronenberg, his body horror films, Scanners, The Brood, you guys. Oh, and of course, Videodrome, White Crow, Black Sabbath from the Philip Roth novel. No, not connected to the Philip Roth novel. So kind of unconventional horror film of the time. I was into, for sure, and still am into. But when I say the word true horror, I more mean kind of disturbing films that tapped into something darker, okay? And you only have to go back a few weeks to when we counted down the top 10 most disturbing books of all time to connect it to my reading. And the first director and films that come to mind is, you hit it on the head, Brianna. Michael Haneke. Maybe my favorite living director today. I discovered him as a kid and have followed him, and let me get Michael Haneke, The Piano Teacher, Code Unknown. My favorite film of his is Cash. All of his films, but one in particular, and the one, again, this is going back to my childhood, it's Funny Games. I remember seeing this film, again, I must have been like 16 or 17, on the Independent Film Channel at 2 a.m. in the morning. I was still living at home, and it really, it changed my view. I thought I was the coolest guy alive after watching Funny Games. It was so disturbing. Now, if I glance back, I don't even think it'd be in my top 5 of his films, but it was such a definitive moment for me. And it's Brianna got Funny Games in a Netflix envelope. I randomly stumbled across the original version, and it is truly a disturbing film. And White Crow mentions it's the only American film that Haneke has ever made was a shot-by-shot remake of Funny Games, which I do want to show simply because it features my favorite poster of all time. I love that poster. I just want to recreate that. That's my isolation aesthetic. after I've been in my cyberpunk dungeon, I come out looking like that. I love that poster. Laura says thoughts on the remake. I thought it was great, especially considering the original message of the original film was directed towards kind of America's fascination with violence. I thought it very fitting that he remade it. I thought Naomi Watts was great, but I definitely preferred the two boys in the original film. I didn't like the casting for, what were their names, like Tom and Jerry or something? I don't know. The two boys I thought were so much, especially the skinny boy in the original here. This guy, he was just, man, he was incredible. He was like both like charming yet really disturbing and scary. But yeah, man, so many of his films. The White Ribbon is great. Hour of the Wolf. The Seventh Continent. Oh my God, that film destroyed me. And again, I would, I saw Funny Games, and then I would go on a spiral through Netflix and just go, and like I do with authors, I become obsessed and just want to read their entire body of work. And I would just go down the line and just, it was a good month of just watching these disturbing Michael Haneke films. And yeah, The White Ribbon is great. I look forward to, Criterion. I've been holding up a lot of these films, a lot of which are Criterion, and I know they have all the rights to all of Haneke's films, so I'm looking forward to them continuing to release his stuff, because he is an important filmmaker of today. So yeah, I was all about, and still am all about, Michael Haneke. Next, we mentioned last week Lars von Trier, of course. I also have to mention him. Again, this was probably even before that period when I was, maybe 14 or 15. And I mentioned I was a big fan of Björk, and, she had won a lot of awards for it. And I didn't quite know what it was about. I had never seen a Lars von Trier film before. And I remember just kind of blindly buying the DVD from online because it had Björk in it. And yeah, it was just another moment. I had this little TV in my room that was like this big, and it had the DVD connected to the television box. Do you remember those? And I watched that film on my little TV, and it ruined me, you guys. It ruined me. I was just so ruined. My beloved Björk. And then, yeah, I would go on to watch all his stuff. I followed it up like immediately after with the film Breaking the Waves, which is just as crushing, Lars von Trier is a very controversial director because he's well known for making these films about women going through horrible things, and he's notoriously very kind of psychologically abusive to these women in these main roles, to pull these performances out of them. And that's, always, been a controversy with him. But again, separating the art from the artist, he's incredible. I mentioned last week my favorite of his films is Dogville. Just insane, disturbing movie. Yeah. Cathal, the Selma Songs album Björk did for that movie is great. Yeah. And that was another thing. I had been listening to Selma Songs like months and maybe a year before even seeing the movie. So I was connected through all these songs through Björk. And then I saw that film and it just freaked me. Yeah, Breaking the Waves. Oh my God. It's so disturbing. So disturbing. What's her name? She's so good, man. Emily Watson, man. I don't know why I couldn't remember her name. Oh, and then Antichrist. That would come later. Melancholia. Probably his least, very disturbing, but least graphic of his films. So if you want to ease your way into Lars von Trier, I think Melancholia would be a good choice. Yeah. Ronan says, only seen Antichrist, but thought it was awfully dull. It's not my favorite of his, but I definitely give him more of a go. And if you can, I wish they would release a good version of Dogville, and restore that, because it's such a good one. White Crow hasn't seen Nymphomaniac. I wasn't a fan of Nymphomaniac. Yeah. That was, I think, one of his weaker moments, yes. Gore Vidal said he saw Breaking the Waves after seeing Irreversible and had to watch Amelie afterwards. Oh, yes. Oh, God. Yeah, Amelie. I was all about that, too. Jean Genet, all of those films, man. There's so much stuff I could cram into there, but I'm trying to pick just a couple out of each category. Man, oh my God. City of Lost Children, Amelie, Delicatessen, all those films. That would definitely go in the style over substance category as well. Yeah, Amelie is the ultimate palate cleanser because nothing bad happens. Like, there's no really stakes within that movie. It is really the ultimate palate cleanser. Oh, man, they don't make films like that no more. They don't make films like that no more. What are we doing? We're doing good on time here. So, one more true horror, of course. I have to mention Solo. How could we forget the shit-eating movie? By Grace. Pasolini is another director I love. I love Pasolini. I love Mama Roma. I love Acatone. I love Tia Roma, which I have here. I love his trilogy of life, where he adapted the Decameron, Arabian Nights, and the Canterbury Tales. And Solo, which was his last film, a lot of people, of course, the adaptation of the Marquis de Sade, a lot of people thought that this was the start of another trilogy, a death trilogy, because he had made this trilogy of life, kind of celebrating these classic stories. And Solo was to be the first installment, what was to be the trilogy of death. And a lot of people, consider it the most disturbing film ever made. It's about these group of teens that are held hostage by Nazis in this mansion. It is a very dark film. I have this copy, which I got a couple years ago. I haven't watched it, probably in over 10 years. But yeah, it's quite the experience to watch. But, again, it's easy to connect my interest in this to the novels, a lot of the novels that I read. I think the big difference between back then and my early days of reading is, one, it takes more to shock me because I've been, through the ringer, you guys. Nothing shocks me anymore. But also because I no longer think I'm cool for reading or watching disturbing stuff. So yeah, Pasolini though, soon after this film was released, he was murdered. He had a crazy life. He had connections to the Italian mafia. He was, homosexual. He was into very young men. He was involved in all these political movements. He was a crazy person, and this was quite the statement to go out on with the Solo. Gore Vidal said he was a fine poet as well, and had a great friendship with Callis. Yeah, intriguing guy. I still have his big fat biography that was written to him. I got to get to that. Yeah. So there's our true horror, okay? True horror. Next, we're going to go into what I'm calling the spectacle, okay? And for me, these are where's my spectacles? Very proud. This has gone very smoothly with these images, you guys. I thought I'd be thrown off with my little Dunkin' Donut moment, but it's been very smooth. The spectacle. When I talk about the spectacle, I'm talking about filmmakers that are almost operatic in quality, running on all cylinders, well, you'll understand when I go through them. The first is Werner Herzog, okay? Aguirre, Wrath of God. Uh, um, hugely influential to me back then, continues to be one of my favorite directors. These films that you're watching and you don't quite know whether you're watching a film or a documentary, um, especially his films, that he did with Kinski, are just insane. Aguirre, The Wrath of God being the most insane. It's just, yeah, like it's this operatic in quality. It's just larger than life. So many of his films, Fitzcarraldo, Nosferatu, even his early stuff, The Dwarf Started Small. I think that's where my obsession with little people blossomed from. I have it's one of my fetishes is little people. If you're a little person, message me. Yeah, all of this. Cathal says flashbacks to watching Aguirre in film school. Mental film, for sure. Colonialism, very much inspired by the Vietnam War. Incredible film. And yeah, just wild. Yeah, Fritz Lang, similar sensibility for sure. Fritz Lang is someone I didn't come to appreciate till much later in my life. Cathal says, have you seen the clips of Kinski yelling at everyone on set? Oh yeah, that's the thing. It really was this magic between Herzog and Kinski that created this chaotic energy, and it totally comes across in the films. Jake said, did you shout out even Dwarves Started Small? Yes, those little people. Look, I have it. Look at this gorgeous, I have this box set of his. Where's those? Look at that. Little guys. It's so good. It's about one of his early films about this little shanty town that's been overrun. Or not shanty town, but it's an estate where the big people are locked inside and all these little people have revolted and they're taking over. It's so good, you guys. So bizarre. Larger than life. Next up, someone reflecting back, I was very hip on getting into this at such a young age, but someone asked that wanted me to do like a directors that I'd like to see in the Criterion Collection, and I know some of you don't know what the Criterion Collection is. They put out mostly classics and art house films, refurbish them, repackage them, do a lot of, it's like the ultimate edition of a movie once it gets like the Criterion stamp of approval. And they release new films every month. And somebody asked me to do a video on, the most, what directors I think should, or, movies and directors should be in the Criterion Collection. And I don't know if I necessarily have the mental energy for that, but if there is one director that it's a crime that they're not a part of the Criterion Collection, it's Peter Greenaway, okay? The Cook, The Thief, His Wife and Her Lover is in my top 10. I love that movie. It is this grotesque, hilarious, bizarre, again, operatic, full throttle, gorgeous film. It's so good. I love Peter Greenaway. And it's sad. I don't even have any of his release. I have the Z and Two Knots somewhere. I do have that. But there's not, most of his stuff has not been released in good editions. So I don't have any. And it's a crime because he has so many classics, A Z and Two Knots, The Cook, The Thief, Belly of an Architect, so much. Droughtman's Contract. I used to listen to the soundtrack to the Droughtman's Contract, I was all about it. And yeah, this again, you can rent it places. If you have not seen The Cook, The Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, it's just, yeah, you have to see it. Again, it's full throttle. It's, huge in scope, and it's just this gorgeous film. So if there was one director that I could hope the Criterion, and there's always been rumors that they're gonna get around to his films. Gore Vidal said he saw the films in theaters. It's in your top 10 as well. I saw it multiple times when it premiered and lived in Austin. It was banned in most theaters because it was given no rating. Yeah. Francine says, Peter Greenaway, what a body of work. Yeah, and totally, underrated, man. Yeah, Helen Mirren, she was incredible in it. And the dude, who's her husband in it? All the food imagery in that film. Oh God, the color palette. It's just incredible. So funny, loud, brash, disturbing. It's just all of it. Number 3 in the spectacle, of course, the ultimate spectacle. We have to talk about Fellini. Okay. Again, seeing La Dolce Vita for the first time was one of just those definitive moments in my life. I had never seen anything like it. There has been no one like Fellini, though many have tried, including Pasolini. I named my cat after Fellini, for Christ's sake. He is the definition of the spectacle to me. His films are very episodic in nature. They roll along, again, like an opera, like a circus. It's just this rolling ball of life, man. And Brianna has not seen any Fellini. It should be your greatest shame. But, go to 8.5, go to La Dolce Vita. I love it. I love Roma, Amarcord. But yeah, it really is these two films, La Dolce Vita and 8.5. He just is it's it's the most fun you will have. It's just like you're just and again, I call these spectacles because I really view it as running on all cylinders, man, story wise and the scope. And I connect that to my reading with so many authors I love. I think of Muriel Spark and Lawrence Durrell and Thomas Pynchon and even Philip Roth. Authors that I do find run on all cylinders. And another thing you'll see that all 3 of these directors and all of the books I mentioned were also authors who had an incredible sense of humor. And that's important, to be. It takes real talent to balance something that can be taken seriously, but also has just really great humor within it. And I think Fellini was great at that as well. So, the spectacle, you guys. Oh yeah, and oh my God, La Strada. Yeah. Some anniversary of Fellini, there's predictions that Criterion's gonna release a whole box set of his stuff, so we'll see about that. 2 more categories left. Next, we're gonna go into the slow burn. Again, we're going over movies. I know a lot of these choices within these categories are not groundbreaking, and just like with the more we read, our scope and our taste is more diverse and large. The same goes for my filmmaking, but again, I'm focusing in on those directors and films that shaped my original love for cinema. So, not a lot of surprises. Okay, so slow burn are movies that are not only usually, directors that are putting out films that are usually quite long, but also ones that kind of require attention. Okay. Again, you could pick out a lot of directors for these, but I picked out just 3. The first is Terrence Malick. Where's my Terrence Malick? Ding. My favorite Terrence Malick is Days of Heaven. Again, could have put this under Americana, but I think it fits better within that. We have Badlands. I love Badlands. Thin Red Line. This was, of course, after my that time period. More recent, The Tree of Life, and The New World. And then my personal favorite of his is Days of Heaven. I just love that. I love the look of that film. I love the color palette. I love Richard Gere in that. The locust scene is one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. Several Gecko says Days of Heaven is the prettiest movie ever. Yeah, it's definitely on the short list. It's like, it's right up there with like Barry Lyndon. It's just like, oh, I just want to like eat that movie. It's so beautiful. That kind of fuzzy, warm tones. Oh my God, the people are beautiful. Oh. Conrad says, I haven't seen A Hidden Life yet, his most recent film. But I heard that it is his return to form since Tree of Life. Again, maybe an author that could fit in Americana, or not a director that could fit in Americana, maybe one that you could even argue his style over substance sometimes, certainly in some of his more recent films. But he, you know, his movies demand, again, very long, man. I just rewatched the director's cut of The New World, I don't know, a month ago. And, you know, it's very long, and you need to sit down. You can't just put it on in the background while you're, you know, making cookies. It's a movie that demands attention. Days of Heaven and his earlier films, Badlands and Days of Heaven, I actually think are, you know, they're on the shorter side and be a good place to start. But yeah, I love Terrence Malick. You know, his films, they're poetry. They're poetry, you know, they're poetry, kind of like Godard, you know, in that, you know, the images were just kind of there to prop up whatever kind of essay he was putting forward. With Malick, the images are just there to kind of guide his whatever poems he's trying to deliver. So I love Terrence Malick. Next up on the slow burn is Akira Kurosawa. Now, you'll notice that there's a serious lack of Asian film on this list. A lot of different types of film, because again, admittedly, I didn't start really getting into Asian cinema until much later. You know, again, in my late 20s and into my 30s and up through today. You know, I mentioned I love the Japanese New Wave. I love Chinese cinema, Koreans, you know, all of that stuff. But Totally Pretentious says, I wouldn't ever categorize Kurosawa as a slow burn director. I do think, you know, out of the three I'm mentioning, I will say he probably makes the most, like, pacey ones, but his films are still, you know, usually on the long side. And depending on which one, you know, he does have quick, you know, Rashomon, for example, is great. And I wouldn't say it's a slow burn, but, you know, Seven Samurai is a 3-hour movie. And, you know, it is one that you just have to sit down and, you know, it's one that's not hard to concentrate on because it's just such an incredible film. It's to me, one of the most comforting films. High and Low is also very long, and it almost feels like two movies, you know, sandwiched together into one. But it's incredible. I just rewatched Ikiru a couple weeks ago. It's great. Ran is great. I love Dreams. There's Ikiru. Great, just great. Comforting for sure. You know, maybe not fair to put him in the slow burn category, but, you know, he does make longer movies. And I think, you know, to a Western audience, it's a harder sell. Unfortunately, to this day, with foreign film, it's still harder sell. But it's worth the time. And, you know, again, this was even back then when I was not watching a lot of Asian cinema, and to show just how influential, you know, Kurosawa is. He kind of transcends the whole thing. So his films are great. Oh, yeah, there's High and Low, Jimbo and Sanjuro, which is great. They're also apparently coming out with like a box set of his stuff soon. Brianna says getting into Bollywood made her appreciate lengthy films. Yeah, for sure. That's a genre which I've seen a bit of, but I definitely am not well versed on. And then the ultimate slow burn, of course. Look at this guy. Look at the side of this guy. Bergman. You're Bergman. Look at is this not a thing of beauty, you guys? Let's put it up. Ding, ding, ding. Ingmar Bergman. Yeah. doesn't get enough credit for the diversity of his films. I think he had a ton of comedies that people don't recognize. I think he was very comedic in a lot of ways. I especially love his early, summer films. But not only a lot of films that are long, but slow burns that do absolutely deserve, the title of a slow burn. Totally Pretentious said, I figured the third would be either Bergman or Tarkovsky. Certainly Tarkovsky would fit, though he's another director I didn't get into until in my 30s. With the exception of Solaris, I hadn't watched any of his films up until just like 5 years ago. Persona, yeah, I mean, I love so many of his films. I love Smiles of a Summer Night is one of my favorite films of all time. Of course, The Seventh Seal. I love Persona. I love Autumn Sonata. I love Silence, Virgin Spring. Scenes from A Marriage Man. I rewatched that a few months ago. It's just, wow. It's just incredible, man. And I have to say, the Criterion release of Bergman is the greatest physical object of film history. They did such an incredible job. And even within it, they don't have every Bergman film, but it's just like a masterpiece. And I've been working my way through, and again, I remember seeing The Seventh Seal, and this was the age of Netflix, and just working my way down. And even back then, Netflix only had didn't have all of his films, but from Smiles of a Summer Night all the way down to Fanny and Alexander, it's just I was obsessed. Yeah. White Crow says he likes Bergman, but have still to see some of his hits. Yeah. Through a Glass Darkly was weird. I love that. I haven't watched that in so long. Fanny Alexander, absolutely, Bruno. The ultimate Christmas movie. Yeah, for sure. I watch it. I try to watch it every Christmas season. That and Meet Me in St. Louis. I watch that every Christmas. Oh, yeah. But yeah, again, he has a reputation for being a very depressing, movie. And I think that's odd because people are small-minded and they view that because all of his film, or the majority of his films, are in black and white, they think he's just all about misery. But he has such an incredibly diverse body of work. Yeah, The Magic Flute. I haven't watched that. There's so many of his films that, it's been such a joy going through the box set, and it was just released a couple years ago. Some of these films I hadn't revisited in 11 years. Hour of the Wolf, yeah. I love it all, man. Connecting that to my reading, connecting the slow burn to my reading. I think it's, it's clear. I appreciate, a longer book, a book that requires, you to focus. I think of, Thomas Mann. I think of Henry James, these books that, if you don't give them the proper attention and don't stick with them, they can, appear to be a burden. But if you invest the time, you're rewarded in such wonderful ways. And yeah, that's something, that's something that's become more challenging the more we age and the more that we're distracted by everything around us, by social media. To me, watching cinema and taking the time to watch a film is really an exercise in patience. And it's something that we've lost, with time. Directors like Bergman are important reminders on why it's important to, have patience and devote your attention. Vanessa says she's always meant to see The Seventh Seal, but hasn't yet. You should. It's, I think, his most accessible movie. I think it's very funny movie. Yeah. Gore Vidal says reading James is like sitting through a symphony. Yeah, absolutely. But it's again, if you try to, whiz through it and don't devote attention to it, you'll lose half of it. Slow burn. Finally, I just want to mention a few camp films, the area of camp. Again, this is something I could spend a lot of time on, but I wanted to mention just three. Wait, dropping stuff. Where's all my camp? Of course, you have to mention John Waters. Another one of those directors that back then you Google when you're a 17-year-old kid, you're getting online, you're saying what's the most disturbing films I can watch. Pink Flamingos is going to come up. Female Trouble, Polyester is incredible. Multiple Maniacs, kind of the king of camp. A lot of his movies I think are not good, but all of his stuff with Divine, I just I ate that stuff up. So John Waters has always been a thing, but yeah, again, his movies outside of the Divine stuff I'm not a big fan of, but Pink Flamingos, man, to this day, the scene with eating the shit, that was much more of a moment than Salo was with it all. It was like that was a moment. Then I wanted to mention, this is kind of a very obscure, I don't know if it's obscure, but something I was obsessed with as a young guy was Busby Berkeley and his film The Gang's All Here. Okay. Has any of you seen this film? Busby Berkeley was incredible with these choreographed movies that he would make. Incredible films. The Gang's All Here was, I know it was the first, and it might have been the only film he ever did in color, in Technicolor. And it's a trip, man. If you have a moment, just go and YouTube the lady with the Tutti Frutti hat, Carmen Miranda with that goddamn banana crown and all of these life-size bananas floating around her. It is surreal. And I used to watch this movie over and over. And it's a total classic, but it is, I think, more of a camp classic for sure. But yeah, if you have a chance to watch this film, please do. It's it is like the definition of camp to me. And then finally, a very influential film to me from my childhood was Death Becomes Her. Okay. True cinema. Now we're getting down to the true cinema. I have very deep connections with this film. Again, this goes way before that period of being a teen in early 20s. I saw this. I've just very vivid memory of watching Death Becomes Her with my mother in the theater. Okay, and we loved it so much. And again, I was 10 or 11 years old, which that was, kind of a bit salacious to take a 10-year-old to, but we loved it so much. We saw it like 2 days in a row. We went to the theater, and I just have such memories. And it was a big deal to me because I was raised in a household where we were raised to hate Meryl Streep. Okay, you guys, this is very random, but my mother and my whole family hated Meryl Streep because, to make a long story short, in the late 80s, there was this thing about pesticides, okay? My grandfather owned a series of apple orchards in eastern Washington. And at that time, Eastern Washington and a place called Wenatchee in particular was the apple capital of the world. No longer it is, because I think Japan is now, and they've torn a lot of the orchards out of there. But it was the place in America where they were producing apples, and there was this study that came out that a certain pesticide was causing cancer within people that they were spraying on the crops within the Yakima Valley and other areas. And Meryl Streep took it as a cause. Again, this was in the late 80s. Meryl Streep took it as a cause, and she was going on all these talk shows, and she was going to Capitol Hill and doing all these speeches about how horrible this pesticide is and how it's causing cancer. They were pulling apple juice out of kids, schools and the cafeterias, and it was a moment in America. Like, it spread throughout all of America. And of course, this was affected my grandfather, who was running apple orchards at the time, and my mother and whatnot. Even though we were over in Seattle. And it turned out that there was no real danger within the, I forget the name of the chemical, but it wasn't causing cancer, and it blew up for no reason. But of course, it had real effects on the people of that industry. So we were not to watch these Meryl Streep films. Okay, like, she was the enemy. And so it was a big deal when me and my mother went to see Death Becomes Her. Not once, but twice in a row. And yeah, that was, I guess, like early to mid 90s. And I remember, when it came out on VHS, we got a copy, and I'd watch it all the time. And yeah, it's still great. It's a camp classic, man. And the special effects in it still are pretty good. They're still pretty good. Yeah, I loved it. Oh, Fat Goldie Hawn with the rewind, Oh, that's iconic. It's just so many iconic moments within that film. Meryl Streep, the first fake woke person. Yeah, White Crow, even now, obviously I'm colored by that history of having to hate Meryl Streep, but I think there's something off about her. There is something off. I'm not a Meryl Streep devotee. So, camp, relating it to my reading, I guess it's, I am someone, I like what I like, and if I view what people want to consider pretentious reading, I don't care. But, I still like to believe that I step outside of my comfort zone enough, and that I have a wide variety of stuff I read. And I especially think it's a thing among young men who get back into reading, and, there's a certain sort of books that they pick up, and that's all they pick up. And I mean, not to say that it can't happen within women as well, but I think, my love for camp like this crossed over into my willingness to explore my own reading and not get stuck into any one, just sitting around and watching Bergman films for the rest of your life. You can't do that. You need some brevity. So the camp. So those are the kind of the films that make it. The last thing I wanted to mention, again, this is also in the mainstream, something that during that time that was very influential on me, and I did want to mention, was Lord of the Rings. Which, again, very much off the beaten path. But I want to mention Lord of the Rings simply because the first Lord of the Rings movie came out in 2001, which was the year that I graduated high school. And I was never really into, blockbuster movies and getting all mixed up in the hype of that. But I always, being a fan of Tolkien, I was really into these movies, and they're the only ones I ever went to on opening night. Like, I'm not one of those people like your Star Wars and your Harry Potters, for God's sake. I was never into that, but I went to every release of the original 3 movies on opening night, to all of those. And I always have fond memories of it because I always went alone. Because, again, I was in a social circle, at the end of high school and coming out of it. I was not in a social circle of like people that would have been into this. Okay, it was like a dark secret. Okay, my Lord of the Rings thing. So I would go every year when they would come out. I would go to myself and I would stand in these lines to see it on opening night. And again, I had never done that before, and I have never since. Maybe I've seen a random smaller movie on opening night, but never like, an event movie. And I would go stand in line and I would go see them by myself, like some dirty little secret. And, my friends wouldn't have gone with these to me, weeks after they came out, let alone on opening night. So I always loved it. And it sparked, and I wanted to bring that up because it's connected all the way through to today, because I'm someone, I much prefer now to go see movies alone. Like, to me, there's something so magical about going to a theater. Not that I won't do it with other people and experience it, but there's something so nice about going to a movie theater and sitting alone and experiencing a film and allowing yourself to feel the emotions without, wondering of who you're with, is liking it or how they're feeling. I don't know. Does that sound like a depressing thing? Yeah. Nicola, you understand. You miss the movies alone so much. Yeah. Especially, man, we have so many wonderful independent theaters in Seattle. And there used to be one like 2 blocks from me called the, oh God, I'm blanking now on the name, but God, why can't I think of it? It's a small theater though, and it was used to be a conventional theater, and they turned it into a movie theater, and it had this myth that it was haunted. And I used to go see. I saw The White Ribbon there alone. I saw Under the Skin there alone. I have so many wonderful memories of seeing movies alone. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Though I will say, Lord of the Rings is a weird, because that is kind of, especially going on opening night. Yeah, I thought it was very adult of me, I don't need people to go with me. Brianna saw the Grand Budapest Hotel. Yeah. But yeah, the Lord of the Rings, I was super into those films. They hold up great. And then every year, also around like the holidays, they would release, the extended editions. Remember those? And it'd come with that long documentary. And every holiday I would watch that. So yeah, I could get down with those franchise films as well. Like, it's not, again, this was a very, little pretentious time for Adam. But I was also a kid that liked kid stuff. Yeah, the old Lord of the Rings movies still hand up. They still, because of all the practical effects used in them, they still look great, while those Hobbit ones they made are just hideous. They're just hideous. They're just so visually ugly. So that was camp. So that was the 7 phases. Again, I could have gone through, there's so much more films that kind of shaped me, but again, I hope I have kind of framed this to make people understand, why I was guided to the reading taste that I did have. And again, it still carries on. That these were all stuff that I was getting into, again, my late teens, my early 20s. A lot of this stuff I've still carried on and loved through the years. And since then, I hopefully have a more diverse and wide range, past all these white men that I'm propping up. And the same thing goes on as I continue to be a reader now for 13 plus years. The book comparison with Lord of the Rings, it's good. I think they made they cut out a lot of stuff, but I think they did what they had to do to make the movie, Book to film adaptation is a whole another video. What makes a good book adaptation and all that. That's a whole nother ball game, right? Brianna says my taste really jumped out in this live stream. Thanks, Brianna. I don't need to lie to kick it. I do have incredible taste. And I know it's a little bit basic with what I've gone through today, but I feel even back then, some of these choices were very hip for, like, you know, a 19-year-old kid to be, you know, into, you know. Oh, Lord of the Rings as a film, what made you a reader? That's a good question, Lord of the Rings, because I'm not drawn to, like, for franchises of books. But I do read, I like fantasy, okay, you know. Thanks, Stephanie. I am the tastemaker. But if you're someone who's, you know, doesn't read not a lot of cinema, you know, go back and make a note of some of these titles. Because again, the majority of these directors are very like film school, like 101. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff. You know, I know we talked one week about Kubrick. Funny enough, I wasn't a big Kubrick fan back in the day. And, you know, there's so many directors and stuff that I didn't talk about. But, you know, I do have a letterbox, Stephanie. I think I thought I added you on there, Stephanie. I think I added you. But I don't use my letterbox. I'm really bad at updating it. I'm trying to get more into it, and I like keeping up with people. Bruno just watched A Letter to Three Wives. I did like that, Bruno. Someone called Turner just watched Alice in Wonderland. Jen Campbell's just got that on loop. Oh yeah, it's probably A Life Less Boring. Yeah? Is that my name? Oh yeah, A Life Less Boring. Stephanie, you don't even care about me. I'm adding you. Gore Vidal says, having watched your videos over time, the film choices are consistent with your character and literary preferences. Thank you, Gore Vidal. I think so. Especially that Godard, you know, this is the image I'm trying to shape my life. Oh yeah, Nicola, you did mention we made it through the whole show without any Romanian intruders. I was hacked last week, live, you guys. It was very chaotic. But yeah. But it is tough to tell. Maybe, you know, I don't know how much longer. I think I'm going to go with these play Cabals until number 10 and then assess the situation. But maybe sometime we'll go through more specific films. I can do a countdown. But again, you know, talking about film is tough because it just turns into, you know, I love this movie. Do you like it? And they're like, no, I haven't seen that. But have you seen this? You don't know. That's why, you know, I could never get into film YouTube. Like, there's a few people, you know, I mentioned my Beppu I love, but overall these people making these films, they're very weird in their basements with these Blu-rays lining the back, you know, I guess like the books, but yeah. Fatima Farad said, saw Parasite first time, a movie lived up to the hype. That's good. Yeah, I haven't met anyone that disliked that movie. Francine says her classic movie list is already double last year's. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, you know, over on the I guess FilmTube community, they have the same problem with that people with this community have, which is that they're buying all these movies and hoarding them, and you don't get the sense that they're ever watching them. Yeah, Nicola, it's the same thing. Well, you guys, it's 3 o'clock. It's there is a FilmTube, Stephanie. I'm gonna quit the stream here. Thank you. I felt this went very smoothly with my little pictures. Where's my little what aesthetic should I end with? A little Godard. This is my aesthetic. Yes. La Chinese. Thank you, everybody, for joining me, and I will be back next week to talk. I continue to thank everybody for joining me as I work through isolation. Things get dark. I'm drinking Dunkin', but thank God for books and thank God for films. And I'll see you soon. Bye, guys. Take care.